Phantom of the Opera Part 2. After the commotion with the falling chandelier and Christina Day's abduction and Raoul trying to find her in her dressing room, the Phantom took the unconscious Christina down several levels into the sewers beneath the opera house. He took her to his lair. It was a chamber within the sewers. There was a giant pipe organ. It was lit with several hundred candles and oil lamps. To the side there was a desk where there was a inkwell, a quill, and several papers full of different music notes, and some finished, some not, some scratched, and a lot of wadded papers around. And further off to the side was a small table where the Phantom would eat his food, mainly the rats of the sewers. Well, the Phantom put Christina on a makeshift bed. He decided it was time to wake up the sleeping princess, as he said to himself mentally, but before he could start playing his organ to wake her up, an old man walks up to him. This old man was raggedly dressed. He was filthy. He says to the Phantom, "Ah, Monsieur Eric, is that the woman you've been pining after? The beautiful opera singer that you have been talking about aloud to yourself?" Eric turns around and screams at the old man, "Oui, monsieur, and please mind your own business and just go and do your job." The old man says, "Oui, monsieur, I do my job very well. But remember, if the authorities come down here, I might have to tell them where you're at." Then the Phantom grabs the old man by the collar of his shirt and pulls him right up to his face, and he says, "Listen to me, you filthy rat catcher. You say anything to the authorities, and I be feeding you to the very rats you give me to feed on." Then he throws the old man to the ground. The rat catcher says, "Ah, monsieur, yeah, okay, I've been listening to your threats for years. I don't believe a word you said." The Phantom says, "Go away, and remember, monsieur, heed my warning. Many people who never heeded my warnings paid for it dearly." The Phantom sits down on the bench, cracks his fingers, and plays a random song on his organ. It was random and dark, and it woke up Christina. Christina wakes up. As she lifts her upper body up to see where she's at, she says, "Where am I?" The figure at the organ turns around. She was frightened. This man had a mask on, and the masked man said to her, "Fear not, Christina. You're safe down here. I am your angel of music." Christina recognized the voice, and she says, "It is you, the angel of music." But the Phantom said, "I'm not really an angel, neither a devil. I'm just a poor soul who made a deal and paid for it with his face. I am Eric Claudin, also locally known as the Phantom of the Opera." She lets out a big sigh and says, "Sacre bleu, you are real." The Phantom says, "Yes, I am real, but I am not a ghost. I am far from it." And he says to her, "But Christina, there's one thing that is real, and it's going to be you performing my magnum opus, Don Juan Triumphant." He goes on to say to her, "Christina, since you joined the company last year, I have fallen in love with you. Your beauty matches your voice. You have a great voice, and let no one else say so." Christina blushes. She says, "Thank you, monsieur. I am glad I have a fan." The Phantom then says, "Oh, mademoiselle, you have many fans, and you will have many more once you sing my magnum opus, Don Juan Triumphant." He then hands her a paper from the sheet music on his organ, and he hands it to her, and he says, "Now, Christina, read the words as I play them." So the Phantom filled up the organ with more air, and he began blasting his song that he's been writing, Don Juan Triumphant, and she began singing the words.
I see what my
Then it was over. Christina says, "But wait, that's it? It can't be this short." The Phantom says, "It's incomplete." Christina then responds back, "But it can't be incomplete." But the Phantom angrily responds back again, pounding his fist on the organ. "It's incomplete, god damn it, it's incomplete. I've been having trouble all these years trying to finish it. But the problem was I just couldn't find a woman with your voice to sing it. But now that I've heard you sing it, now I have the inspiration to finish it again. The strength." Then he says to Christina, "Christina, long time ago I gave my soul so I could become a famous music writer, and it looks like it's finally going to happen, and you will share this glory with me." The Phantom reaches for a jar that was on his organ. In the jar, he pulls out a gold ring. He quickly grabbed Christina's right hand and put the gold ring on her ring finger, and he says to her, "Now, Christina, you're just like me. Your soul is wedded to the music." She says, "What? No, no." She tried to pull off the ring, but the ring was not coming off. And the Phantom says, "Yes, Christina, me and you are now bound to the music, and we will make it happen." She says, "No, no." Then the Phantom took another thing of chloroform and knocked her out, and he returned her to her dressing room in the opera house. Later that afternoon, in the boarding house of Christina Day, she was frantic trying to get the ring off with soap and water in the washroom, but the ring was not coming off. She was desperate. Then she hears a knock on the door. She dries her hands and quickly runs over to the door. She opens it. It was Raul. Her eyes lit up and she says, "Raul, thank God you're here." She hugs Raul and kisses him and says, "Raul, oh, how should I say this? The Phantom is real." Raul's like, "What? The Phantom real?" Christina then explains her ordeal, and he says, "What? It can't be." Christina says, "It is. Please believe me, Raul, I will not be making this up." Raul says, "Don't worry, Christina, my love. I believe you, and I know someone who might help." The next morning, at a local church, Raul comes in. It was not a Sunday. There was no service going on. There was just one man sitting at the church in the pew near the altar. Raoul sits next to this man. It was none other than Claude Ledoux, the inspector of the French police, and he had a photo album with him with the words "Phantom" on it. Raoul introduces himself and he says, "Inspector Ledoux, I am sorry I was supposed to meet you the next morning after the incident with our stagehand Joseph, but, well, let's just say when you have a business, it's really hard to find time to break away." Ledoux says to Raoul, "I understand." So Raoul sits next to Ledoux, and Ledoux begins explaining about this Phantom to Raoul. "Well, Raoul, the Phantom that seems to be haunting your opera house is none other than a man by the name of Eric Claudin. He was born to a well-to-do family around 1852. Not much is known about him, except that he received extensive training in music and went to the most prestigious music academy in Europe. Then he kind of fell off the map when his fortunes changed and he was not getting anywhere like most struggling musicians. Then he disappeared, and then the murder started to happen," he says. Then he hands over his little photo album to Raoul. Raoul opens the photo album and looks at all the photos of the Phantom's handiwork. Raoul takes his rag out and puts it over his mouth to try not to vomit as he looks through the photo album. Ledoux says to Raoul, "Yes, your friend the Phantom has two methods that he kills people, usually by skinning them alive, or his other preferred method, strangling them." Then Ledoux goes on to explain, "And I do believe that he might have a fixation on one of the female performers in the opera." Then Raoul quickly turned his head to look at the inspector, and he says, "Inspector, how do you know?" Well, the inspector says it to Raoul. When he started doing these murders 2 years ago, he goes on to explain one of his victims was the opera's old prima donna, Anna Walter, a German opera singer who became popular in Paris when she joined the Paris company. Well, she was murdered by the Phantom through strangulation. She had disappeared for 5 days. We searched frantically for her, and we found her. We found her by the Seine, dead, strangled to death. Then the inspector goes on about the next victim, and he says, then the next victim last year was Amanda Frances. She was an English opera singer who took over for Anna when she died as the new prima donna. We found her autumn last year, also by the Seine, strangled to death. And now I have reason to believe he's targeting the current prima donna, Carlotta Drake. Raoul says, no, monsieur. Inspector, you're wrong. He's targeting Christina Day. Then he tells Christina's story to the inspector. The inspector says, sacred blur, then we must act quickly. Several nights later, at the Paris Opera's house annual mass ball, everybody was there, some wearing very elaborate costumes, others wearing just simplistic masks. Inspector Ledoux was there, and his assistant, Armand Dubur, and several other policemen who had just simple masks on. He tells them all right, gentlemen, keep on your guard. I'm sure the Phantom will strike tonight here. Well, Raoul was there too, also wearing just a simplistic mask. He was looking for Christina. Christina was there, also wearing a more simplified mask, but hers was gold. Well, people were dancing, having fun, drinking, and admiring everybody's costumes. Of course, Carlotta Drake was there, just hogging attention as she had a whole crowd of people surrounding her asking questions. She was laughing and giggling. She was just having fun, like anybody else. Shortly afterwards, two characters enter the room. A very ragged-looking man with a rat-shaped mask on. It was none other than the rat catcher, the one who lives in a sewer and gives the Phantom his food of rats. Then the one that really grabbed attention was none other than the Phantom. He came in wearing the most elaborate costume. It was a bright red costume with a skull mask on. He announced himself as the Red Death. Soon everybody began whispering, talking. Who is that masked man that just announced himself as the Red Death? He comes walking through, shoving some people that were in his way like he was royalty or something. And those he shoved out the way is like, well, I never. Who's this monsieur who thinks he's all that? Well, he finally finds his target, Christina. Christina had rendezvoused with Raoul, and she says to Raoul, Raoul, let's go outside and talk up in the roof. Raoul says, okay. Meanwhile, on the windswept roof of the Paris Opera House, Christina was pleading to Raoul to take her out of Paris as quick as they can. She was fearful for her life and fearful for his life. She says to Raoul, Raoul, you don't understand the Phantom. He has ears in the wall and eyes all over the place. He knows what I'm doing. Anything I do, he'll find out. Raoul says to Christina, don't worry, Christina, I have faith in Inspector Ledoux. Inspector Ledoux will capture the Phantom and see that he goes to the gallows. Christina never felt so more reassured in her life that she quickly embraced Raoul and they passionately began to kiss. But unbeknownst to the lovers, that the Phantom was on top of the giant horse statue that decorated the Paris Opera House, his big red cape flapping in the wind as he looked down below them in anger. So she betrays me, he says in his mind mentally. She betrays me. Oh, tonight it ends then. Tonight it will end, said the Phantom to himself mentally as he quickly got off the giant statue and went back inside. Back inside at the ballroom, a drunken partygoer noticed the Phantom in his costume, and he says to the Phantom, excuse me, monsieur, who are you behind that mask? He reaches over to take off the skull mask of the Phantom. The Phantom quickly grabs the drunken man's hand and crushes it with his own hands. The drunken man screams in agony, and the Phantom says to him, "Never touch another man's mask, monsieur. Never." The Phantom goes up to where Carlotta is, as Carlotta was still just talking and being the center of attention. He quickly grabs Carlotta, pulls her, and he says, "Of course, mademoiselle, I will have this dance with you." So him and Carlotta began to dance. Carlotta wondered, "Who are you, monsieur? Who is a dashing man behind the mask?" The Phantom says to Carlotta, "You really want to find out, mademoiselle?" Carlotta said, "Yes." And then the Phantom says to her, "Of course then, mademoiselle. Let's go to someplace private, and I will show you the man behind the mask." They went to a very quiet, out-of-the-way area within the ballroom. The Phantom throws Carlotta against the wall. Carlotta's like, "Ooh, monsieur," thinking this was going to lead to something sexual. But Carlotta didn't know how wrong she was. Well, Carlotta then reaches over to the skull mask of the Phantom and pulls it off. Her jovial face, full of passion, quickly turned to that of terror. She was about to let out a scream. Before she could let out a scream, the Phantom put his hands over her mouth. Moments later, at the table where all the hors d'oeuvres were, Ledoux went to grab a little something to nibble on, while him and the rest of the policemen were looking for the Phantom, waiting for him to strike. At the hors d'oeuvres table was a man wolfing up all the hors d'oeuvres he can. It was none other than the rat catcher. Ledoux noticed the ragged man with the rat mask, and he says to the rat catcher, "Well, monsieur, that's a very lovely costume. You look like a rat who took the rat catcher's clothing." The rat catcher stops eating. He turns around and he says to Inspector Ledoux, "Inspector Ledoux, the one you're looking for is here right now, and he's about to commit another atrocity." Ledoux quickly grabs the arm of the rat catcher and is like, "What do you mean, monsieur?" "Oh, you'll find out," said the rat catcher. "You'll find out." At that moment, the waiters were bringing in the main course for the ball. The maitre d' was saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you tonight's main course? Roasted pig." He lifts up the cover to reveal a big thing of pig, nice and roasted, with an apple in its mouth. Then he took off all the other trays, revealing all the other food for the main course. Then he gets to the final part, the soup. He lifts up the tray and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the soup for tonight, tomato soup." The other waiter began stirring the soup with a ladle. Soon he lifts up the ladle from the soup, and instead of a ladle full of soup, a severed head is lifted out from the soup. Everybody screams in terror and begins to run. It was none other than the severed head of Carlotta Drake. In the panic, as everybody was running and screaming from the horrific sight, Philippe de Chagny passed out from what he saw. That moment, the Phantom grabs Christina and quickly pulls her away. She lets out a blood-curdling scream, "Raoul! Raoul!" Raoul looks as she was being pulled away by the Phantom. He fights the crowd that's running from the scene, trying to get to her, but he couldn't. Ledoux stops and is like, "Don't worry, Raoul, we're coming with you." Moments later, the men were in the cellar, going down into the sewer to find the Phantom's hideout. They were dragging along the rat catcher to lead them where the Phantom is hiding at. Well, all of a sudden, the rat catcher breaks himself free and quickly runs. He shuts a door behind him, and he shouts through the iron bars of the door, and he says to the policeman and Raoul, "I have to go ahead. If I don't get rid of the rats won't let you get through. Just follow the sound of your girl screaming or him playing his organ. You'll find him." And the rat catcher runs off. Ledoux says to Dubert, "You go this way," and he tells the policeman, "You guys go that way," and he says to Raoul, "You come with me and we'll go this way." And the men split up. Meanwhile, in the Phantom's lair, the Phantom throws Christina down and he begins the process of raping her. As he was forcing himself on her, Christina let out a scream. She quickly breaks one arm free, reaches for the Phantom's skull mask, and pulls off his skull mask also. In the process, knocks off his hat. She lets out a blood-curdling scream as she finally sees the Phantom's true disfigured face. His skin was yellow, his eyes were coal black, his eyeballs were yellow, his lips were pulled back. He almost looked like a skull himself. His cheekbones were so prominent that it looked like he had no other flesh underneath his skin, and his eyes were sunken like that of a skull, and he had mainly little wisps of hair left. He was almost bald. Christina screams, and then the Phantom says to her, "This is what happens when you sell your soul to the devil to try to make the ultimate masterpiece. You lose your face. You lose your face." And then he tries to thrust himself into her again. Then he stops as he could hear the screams of Raul calling for Christina. He gets up and he says, "Oh, your little lover boy's here, Christina. Well, I'm going to take care of him once and for all." And the Phantom runs off as she screams, "No, no, don't do it." Meanwhile, in the winding tunnels of the sewer, the men were searching in their little individual assigned areas. The small group of policemen that were with Ledoux were searching their area. They were in an area where there were old creaky floorboards. They were wondering this floorboard could support their weight. Well, just before they could give it another thought, all of a sudden the wooden floorboards cracked and gave way, and the men fell to their death. Meanwhile, in another part of the sewers, Dubert was looking around to find the Phantom's hideout. As he looked around, he saw the doorway. He figured that was the doorway to the Phantom's hideout. As soon as he goes through the door, a old metal door slides down, trapping him in the room. Dubert looks around. He was trapped. There was no way out of that room. All of a sudden, he hears a bizarre noise, and he looks. The room was filling in with water, and all of a sudden, the water starts rushing into the room. Meanwhile, in another part of the sewer, there was a rat catcher shooing his rats away. He's like, "Come on, my lovelies, get out of the way. Shoo, shoo, get out of the way." All of a sudden, the Phantom appears in front of him. With the Phantom unmasked and seeing the Phantom's face, it frightened the rat catcher. The rat catcher was like, "Oh, dear God in heaven, you're. The Phantom then finishes, "My face. You see, rat catcher? You see what happens when you make a deal with evil? They take away your face." The rat catcher says, pleading for his life, "But monsieur, I protect you. I keep the rats off of you." The Phantom says, "Yes, rat catcher, you do keep the rats off of me, and you're still going to keep the rats off of me." The Phantom grabs the rat catcher by his shirt collar, lifts him up in the air, and impales him on a lantern holder on the wall of the sewer. Moments later, Inspector Ledoux and Raoul arrive where the rat catcher was impaled at, and they were shocked to find that the rat catcher was, one, dead, and two, there was nothing of him left but bones, as the rats were crawling all over him and pretty much stripped him down to his bones. They ate him. The two men knew they were on the right path. Moments later, in the Phantom's lair, Christina was curled up in the corner crying from what happened to her. The Phantom comes in and he says to her, "It's time to lure your lover Raoul and the inspector in here just to get rid of them once and for all." The Phantom sits down on his organ and he starts playing his magnum opus, Don Juan Triumphant. Sure enough, outside, Raoul and Ledoux heard the organ playing. They ran towards it and they entered the phantom's lair, lit by hundreds of candles and little lanterns, but he was nowhere to be found. Raoul quickly sees Christina curled up in the corner crying. He runs over and he says, Christina, Christina, are you okay? Christina says sobbingly, Raoul, he did something horrible to me. He took away the one thing I was saving for you. Raoul knew right there what she meant, but he didn't have very long to ponder, as the phantom just came out of nowhere, tackled Raoul, and pulled out a knife and stabbed Raoul right in the gut. He then throws Raoul's lifeless body against the wall, where his body was ignited by the candles on the wall, and his lifeless body fell on the ground of flame. Christina screamed, No! The phantom says, Yes, you're mine, woman. You're mine, as he grabs her violently and lifts her up, and he says to her, Nothing's gonna separate us. Nothing. All of a sudden, a gunshot rings out, and a bullet hits him in the shoulder, and he drops Christina. He then says to the phantom, Let her go, you demonic freak. And he fires another round at the phantom. That round went into the phantom's chest, but missed the heart, but he was still badly wounded. The phantom stumbles over to the far corner of his lair. Ledoux comes patiently walking. He points the gun again at the phantom, ready to finish him off. He was still horrified by the hideous face of the phantom. The phantom looks at Ledoux, and he says to Ledoux, So, Inspector, I'll let you win this round, but I'm not going down alone. The phantom reaches over with his bloody hands, and he pulls down a valve. Ledoux hears a hissing coming from the pipes that were at the far end of the phantom's lair. Ledoux quickly figured out what it was. He turns around and screams at Christina, Christina, get out now! Get out now! Christina didn't have to think twice. She quickly ran towards the yucky sewer water and dives right in. Sure enough, it was gas. The gas fills up the room, and of course, the hundreds of candles that were lit, all the lanterns, and the flaming body of Raoul caused the entire place to explode in a massive explosion. And of course, after that massive explosion, the entire area caved in. Well, the cave-in was so huge that parts of the streets and sidewalk of Paris caved in too, when the Phantom's lair and part of the sewer in that area caved in. Christina survived as she surfaced. She was just horrified at the fact that she was swimming in dirty sewer water. She makes her way to a walkway in the sewer, and pulls herself out of the water. She wandered for hours, lost in the sewers. She didn't know how to get out. She sees a ladder that leads up to a manhole cover. She said to herself, Oh, thank God. Oh, it's freedom. All of a sudden, she was startled. It was not the Phantom. It was a badly burned Inspector Ledoux. He survived, but he was very burned. He says to Christina, Oh, thank God I found you. Oh, my skin, my body. The Phantom, he's dead. We gotta get out, he says. Mustering the last of his strength, he climbs up the ladder first, knowing that Christina was not going to be able to lift that manhole cover. He gets to the top, and he opens the manhole cover. Christina sees beautiful daylight flooding in from the open cover. Ledoux gets out first. As he gets out, a lot of people walking the street saw in shock as the burnt Ledoux gets out. Well, after he gets out, Ledoux collapses. Then Christina follows him. She gets out. She didn't look too peachy herself. The costume she wore was dirty and torn, and she smelled like the sewers. She runs over to Ledoux as she climbs out of the sewer and sees Ledoux was dead. Few policemen come up and they said, "Sacred Blood, what's going on here?" Christina explains the entire situation. The years pass. Christina became a successful opera singer for the Paris Opera Company. As for the legend of the Phantom, his legend still haunts the Paris Opera House to this day. Some say you could hear his pipe organ, his famous magnum opus, Don Juan Triumphant. Like and subscribe. The end.